Hello, my name is Kaitlyn Willy, and I am coming to you from the University of North Texas. I'm sorry that I can't join you all for the conference. I want to thank the conference coordinators for allowing me to present via video. I wish that I could participate by reading or listening to your own papers, but if you have questions or comments for me, my contact information will be provided by the conference coordinators. The title of my paper is Dystopian Fiction, Re-Enchanting Agriculture in the Post-Apocalyptic World. The resurgence of the post-apocalyptic and dystopian fiction since the early 2000s is something that we have all surely noticed. In the realm of young adult fiction especially, these novels frequently become box office hits, bringing them far more to the forefront than before. Dystopian fiction, science fiction, and even comic books are no longer for geeks sitting in the back of classrooms, but are often the most popular books and movies being released. In terms of dystopian fiction especially, I believe that this resurgence is important for those interested in the way that literature can speak to the environmental movement. While the popular post-apocalyptic fiction of the second half of the 20th century generally revolved around the atomic bomb and other Cold War era fears, the renaissance of the apocalyptic has taken on a new tone, a fear of the end of the world not only caused by war, but also by environmental decline and abuse of natural resources. While there are many such elements of these novels and films, one notable area of interest is the role of agriculture within these stories. Given the current placement of farmers within the mainstream social culture, it is particularly interesting that dystopian fiction authors have a tendency to place farming and food supplying at an important station within their dystopian realities. Whereas today, agriculture is no longer considered a profession to pursue in the so-called first world, and the majority of school children cannot identify where their food comes from, dystopian characters seem to be more in tune with the earth, have a superior understanding of the soil, and are very much concerned with where food comes from and how to get it. This phenomenon seems most clearly focused in the dystopian fiction of the last 2 decades. However, if we delve back into older dystopian fiction from the end of the last century, we find that the trend was taking root in texts like Ridley Walker, where the culture is only able to recover after the society moves from being hunter-gatherers to farmers, or E.B. White's story, The Morning of the Day They Did It, in which industrial pesticides result in humans having to take a shot every 21 days to counteract the lethal effect of food. Yet when looking at a dystopian fiction published by decade, it is evident that there is a real switch in apocalyptic modes between the 20th and 21st centuries, and it is in the latter that we really begin to focus on the role of agriculture in the New World Order. There are obvious examples of this phenomenon within modern dystopian literature. Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy revolves around a bunch of organic farmers, as well as scientists who genetically engineer animals for easier meat production. The film, Interstellar, shows us results of obsessive monoculture and posits the theory that sustainable food production and not technological advancement should be our primary focus. And in The Hunger Games, Katniss's success, as well as that of the larger revolution, relies in large part upon her expertise as a hunter and her mother and sister's ability to keep an herb garden. These stories, among others, show that there are many options for discussing the connection between dystopian literature and what I'm calling the re-enchanting of agriculture in the post-apocalyptic world. I say enchanting because of the way in which agriculture takes on a mystical quality in these stories, placing something mundane into a role of the spiritual or mystical. In each such text, the storyline involves a significant emphasis on the question of how to grow food in the New World Order, something that seems foreign to us living in a world where most consumers do not consider the origin of their food, in spite of the many organic farming movements that are now re-emerging. The primary reason that dystopian literature provides an ideal space for reimagining agriculture is that dystopian literature is by nature a genre in which the author is able to adapt the world of the story to make a message heard. There is no set reality for dystopian stories. The world of the Maze Runner is far, far different from the worlds of The Hunger Games or Interstellar, which are different still from the worlds of The Giver or The 100. Some of these realities seem familiar, while others seem shocking and remote. This flexibility within dystopian literature lends a hand to the ability of the author to insert into their story a commentary on food sourcing and farming, which generally includes a critique of the current agricultural system as corrupt, or at the very least problematic. The writers may believably uproot the food industry in a world turned upside down with war and disease, changing or adapting the industry from the message they want to relate. In this vein, we see critiques of the modern industrial agriculture in texts like White's story, The Morning of the Day They Did It, and Interstellar. Commentaries on the importance of food access and the freedom that comes from being sustainable in the Hunger Games, the 100 in Article 5, and even assumption about the kinds of people who farm, as seen in Divergent and Mad Adam. As a result of these messages about farming and food within these stories, dystopian literature has emerged as an ideal space in which to discuss the agricultural dilemma and reimagine or re-enchant farming and food sourcing. I think there are many notable contributions that dystopian fiction can make towards this discussion, but for the purposes of this presentation, I will consider two primary contributions. The first contribution is to remind the reader that food access is essential to survival and plays a role in power structures. This is particularly important within the context of dystopian texts, because such texts are often concerned with revolution or reformation of culture. The second contribution that dystopian fiction makes is a literary reimagining of the future, giving authors the opportunity to consider what food sources and food sourcing may look like in the future and what repercussions might arise from modern agricultural methods. For the remainder of this presentation, I will look at these contributions in detail, identifying specific texts that can be used as an example of the ways that these ideas are experienced in dystopian fiction. Now, for the first of these contributions of dystopian fiction. Such fiction presents us with stories that enable us to explore a world where the earth is no longer a commodity, but the lifeblood of the community. These dystopian stories emphasize the way in which humanity is embedded in the world and allow community to return to the center of the agricultural process. The communities with access to agriculture are the ones with the power, with leverage to be successful. One example of the way in which groups can gain power through access to agriculture can be found in the popular dystopian television show, The 100. This show is about the survivors of a nuclear war over 100 years after the bomb, with the storyline focused around a group of juvenile delinquents descended from people who were on space stations when the bomb went off and who joined together to create the Ark, a massive grouping of space stations orbiting the Earth. These teens are sent to the Earth to find out if it's inhabitable yet and quickly find out that they are not alone. In the 100, there are three primary communities: the grounders, known for hunting and gathering, the residents and the former residents of the Ark, who have only just returned to Earth after generations in space, and then the people of Mount Weather, the last group of civilized persons descended from the people who set off the nuclear bomb that devastated the world. The only group that has ready access to agriculture on the ground during the first two seasons of the show is the people of Mount Weather, tyrants that use their technological advantage to murder the other inhabitants of the world for their own gains. One of the primary reasons that this group is able to leverage their advantage is because, unlike the other two groups, the people of Mount Weather do not have to fight to survive. For the grounders and the newcomers from the Ark, eating generally means hunting and gathering. Agriculture other than a few simple crops growing naturally is beyond their grasp. For the residents of Mount Weather, access to food without spending time hunting and gathering guarantees their success. While agriculture still takes a great deal of time, it is left to a small group of the population to grow food for the whole, enabling the other members of the community to make inroads in technology and weapons. Access to food is not only important for dystopian tyrants like Mount Weather, but also the revolutionaries that stand up to them. A recurring idea among dystopian novels tells readers that successful dystopian revolutionaries are the ones who have access to food, generally in the form of agriculture. Like the grounders in the 100, hunter-gatherer cultures displayed in dystopian realities are generally too busy with the work of survival to launch a successful revolution against those controlling them. One obvious example is The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. The capital succeeds in oppressing the people of Panem despite the fact that they are so outnumbered because they limit access to food and other important supplies, keeping the people scrounging for food and dependent on capital resources. Katniss is only successful in the arena because she knows how to hunt and can identify poisonous plants, giving her an advantage against other teams. However, it is only after she comes to District 13, which has both technology and ready access to food through their own agriculture, that she and her comrades are able to have a successful revolution. This example is not perfect, however, as it is simultaneously the access to weapons technology and the access to food that enables District 13 to bring about a revolution. A more exact example of this can be found in Kristen Simmons' Article 5 trilogy. In this trilogy, the protagonist, Ember, and her boyfriend, Chase, are running from the military police force in the dictatorial state the U.S. has turned into since a fictional World War III. Ember and Chase end up joining a group of revolutionaries known as the Resistance after Chase breaks Ember out of a reformatory. Throughout the first 2 books of the trilogy, the two are fighting for survival against both the military police and from hunger. In her narration, Ember is constantly commenting on how much weight the two have lost to the detriment of their energy and health. It is obvious that although the resistance fighters are morally right, they are unlikely to win the fight because they are, frankly, starving to death. It is only in the 3rd and final book, when they come to the Endurance, the main camp of the resistance's leadership, that the tide of the story is turned and hope is found. When Ember enters into the camp, she describes in detail the farming operation taking place, the areas where livestock are kept, and the rows and rows of crops that she had never seen anything like before. The importance of the food situation at the Endurance is seen in Ember's description of her first meal there. Quote, "We ate a meal like I'd never seen before, not even when I was home, and my mother had a job before the war had started. I ate myself sick. I wasted nothing. And when my plate was clean, a lanky boy with skin so tan it was nearly the color of red clay asked me if I wanted more. And I said yes, because the memory of hunger was as sharp as the real thing." This is only one of the many examples of Ember describing the ready access to food that the residents of Endurance enjoy. As a result, these revolutionaries look very different from Ember's compatriots at the front lines. They are strong, well-fed, and healthy. When they join the battle alongside Ember and Chase, they give the revolution a chance at success. They do not have any more technology than the resistance closer to the front. On the contrary, they have less access to computer technology and no access to the internet. The biggest difference for the residents of the Endurance camps is that they aren't hungry, and as already noted, when people are no longer in a constant state of having to scrounge for their next meal, they are able to make real progress and get things done. So for the second contribution of dystopian fiction, I point out that the reimagining permitted in the dystopian genre also includes a reimagining of the after effects of our own modern industrial farming methods. Nowhere can this be more clearly seen than in the film Interstellar, which posits that after centuries of abusive monoculture corroding the soil and killing off the varieties of crops, a series of blights will make it impossible to grow enough food to feed the world. At the same time as crops are dying off and people are starving, a new dust bowl has arisen, and at one point the head of NASA claims that the last to starve will be the first to suffocate. The moral of the film is rather on the nose, as can be seen as when the protagonist, Cooper, complains that his son will not be allowed to attend college. The principal of the high school responds, "We didn't run out of television screens and planes, we ran out of food. We need farmers." The message is clear. The current focus on technology and abuse of the soil will result in downfall. The creators of this film are reimagining our future, and rather than the hopeful future of other science fiction series and films, this one is dystopian and not looking good for the human race. In looking at these two contributions of dystopian fiction towards re-enchanting agriculture, it's clear that dystopian fiction has earned a place within ecocritical studies, reminding us of the way in which we are embedded in the world and therefore rely on the earth to provide nourishment. None of the dystopian texts that I have looked at employ anything similar to the food synthesizer in Star Trek. All rely entirely on food brought forth from the soil through the work of human hands. Overall, dystopian fiction is significant for the ecocritical discussion because it explores the structure of a society that is both in and post-crisis. As our own environmental crisis grows in gravity, dystopian fiction can allow us to explore our environmental situation and the attitudes, actions, and power structures that have led to it. With ecological disasters caused by industrial farming on the rise and food sourcing gaining public attention, dystopian literature and its discussion of agriculture is an important space for new discussions to begin.